Hi, welcome back to my channel where I talk about what I knit. My name is Abby and today we'll be talking about what I knit in the month of February as well as a little bit in the beginning of March because that is where we're at in the year of our Lord 2025. I am drinking tea today. That's how you know I'm a real knitting podcaster. So we've got all the usual stuff to talk about, starting with what I'm wearing, which is my first FO. This is the fade raglan that I was working on last episode. I had finished the body, but I needed to knit the sleeves. So I got them done and it's an FO now. So I knit this because I saw that Tannis Fiber Arts had listed their Advent set after Christmas and they had a full photo of the set. So I got to see it before I purchased it. And it was 12.95 gram mini skeins starting from this bright pink and it fades into this navy blue. I really liked the fade and I figured that this would be enough yarn to knit a full sweater, and I wanted to try that because I have never knit anything in a fade before. It's not necessarily something that I think that I'll get a lot of wear out of, but it was just a really fun thing to try. There's not a pattern for this. I talked in my last episode about how I came up with this design because I had a very specific sweater in mind, even though it's quite simple. I wanted a compound raglan. I wanted to start with the ribbing at the neckband so that I could cast on with my first skein, knit the entire skein, fade in the next color, etc., all the way down to use up all of the yarn that I had. So I took my gauge and I came up with my own pattern essentially, and I did write it all out before I started knitting just to make sure that it all worked. So I have short rows in the back. The raglan is a compound raglan, so it curves to match your natural shape a little bit better. And I did talk about all of the things that I did to math all of that out in my last episode. So because I wanted to use up every skein in my fade set, when I started the yoke, I just knit until I was a few rounds away from finishing that color so that I could fade in the next color. And I just kept doing that until I got to the separation of body and sleeves. Once I got to that point, I had to figure out how much of each mini skein to knit in the body so that I would still have enough to knit in both sleeves while matching where the fade, like where the colors fade on the body and the sleeves, and making sure that I had enough yarn to knit full length sleeves while trying to use up like all 95 grams of each color that I had. So it was a bit of a trick and I did have to re-knit my first sleeve. So I knit my first sleeve a little bit too long and the fade, the colors had started to get a little bit mismatched on the body and the sleeve. And so for the second sleeve, I fixed that. I knit it a little bit shorter and then I re-knit that first sleeve to match the other one. So now they fully match up and they do match the body, which I am very happy about. Because I wanted to use every color in the fade from top to bottom, the sweater did end up a little bit long. And this is a superwash merino. It's actually called a pure wash because it's a slightly more eco-friendly way of processing the wool into a superwash wool. And because this is superwash, I decided to put it in the dryer for just a few minutes. So I blocked it as normal. I got most of the water out and then I just threw it in my dryer for a bit and watched it to make sure that nothing bad was happening. And it worked out really well. This is a really good length on me now, and I had enough positive ease in the circumference that it didn't shrink too much horizontally. It really just took a lot of the length out. So I am really happy about how that worked out. I don't make a habit of throwing my hand knits in the dryer, even though this is superwash. I wouldn't put it in the dryer over and over again. It is quite fuzzy after going in the dryer and I am like picking off pieces of fluff. And there was quite a bit of yarn lint in my dryer trap. So as with most materials that you put in the dryer, it's gonna get a little bit degraded each time you do it. So yeah, I'm not gonna like throw it in the dryer a bunch of times, but I also don't plan on wearing this a ton. This was just a fun thing to work on. I did have a lot of ends to weave in, as you can imagine. I think it took a little bit over an hour to weave them all in, and I wove them in on the knit side because this is reverse stockinette. And so I didn't want those ends to show on the right side. I looked up a few different methods to figure out what would look best, and I settled on using the technique where you wind the yarn around one leg of a column of knit stitches, like how you would weave in your ends in ribbing. And I really like how that turned out. There is a seam on the back where I switched colors, and you can see it. And I was a little bit worried about that being very prominent and ugly, but I think in the end, it's not that noticeable, and all of my ends are woven in along that line as well. And I don't really think you can tell. I just love how this fades from this bright pink all the way to this navy blue with some like greens and purples speckled in. It's definitely a different look for me, but this was really more of a process knit than anything else. I just had a lot of fun making it. I had fun designing my own pattern and getting the fit exactly how I wanted it, and then also just figuring out how to fade in all of my colors while maximizing my yardage. But it was a fun thing to try, and I'm happy that it's done. My next FO is another brightly colored object. This is my Musselburgh hat, and I said last time that I was going to have this done by my next episode, and I got it done. And I will throw it on so you can see it on me. This is a total vibe. I envisioned me wearing this hat with a black outfit, not this, but I knit this out of Cascade Heritage. It's their like sock line. So it is 75% superwash merino, 25% nylon. And this is the second hat, a Musselburgh hat that I've knit out of this yarn. And I really like it for this pattern. It's just a good solid fingering weight yarn. And this hat took up almost an entire skein. So you can just buy a skein and knit a hat with it, so it really works out well. I knit the adult medium size on an 8-stitch gauge, and I did follow the pattern exactly to get this length. It fits my head at the crown, but it does have a really nice wide brim, which I like in a hat like this. And I started this back in July as just my mindless stockinette project. It's just stockinette in the round for this long, and if you've ever knit one of these, you know how much knitting is involved, but I didn't really expect it to take me this long to finish it, but I did set it down for quite a few months, and I knit it, like I said, to pattern, so it was about 18 and I think 1/4 inches or 3/4 inches from the initial crown shaping until you start the decreases on the other side. This yarn blocks out just surprisingly nicely. My stitches are crisp and clean and like much nicer than I would expect for a superwash yarn. And I also like that there's a line right here where I folded the brim, and I didn't block it folded up. I blocked it completely flat, but just because I have it folded, it will just remember where I folded it and keep it in that shape. So I like this yarn quite a bit for this hat. Moving on to whips, I showed you a few swatches last episode, and I have since cast on a couple of the projects. And the first is my Oon sweater by November Knits. This is a pretty basic top-down raglan, but the main design feature is the really deep ribbed hem with side slits. I'm knitting this out of Knitting for Olive Heavy Merino in the colorway Blood Orange. And this color is really trendy right now, by the way. I was sitting in a coffee shop in my city the other day just watching people walk in and out, and I would say like every other person who walked in was wearing a hat in this exact color. It was legitimately like 50% of the people, and I was about to cast this sweater on, so I was like, cool. This yarn is 100% merino, but it's actually not very soft. I think this is my first time working with it, and I think because it's such a popular yarn, I was expecting it to be like pretty soft to the touch, but it's actually like quite toothsome. It's definitely got a texture to it, and I like that a lot. I think it's going to wear really well, and it's really nice to knit with, and I wouldn't describe it as scratchy. It's just not like soft. So I'm knitting the size 3, which is about 48.5 inches in circumference, which is quite oversized for me. That is more than 10 inches of positive ease, but I do think this style works best with a lot of positive ease. A few years ago, I bought a hoodie from Everlane that has the same style, where right under the arms, the sides are split. And I bought it in my size and I wore it a lot, but I'd always wished that I had gone up a size or 2 with that style. So that is why this has so much positive ease on me. So you cast on at the neck and you knit this folded over neckband. And in this worsted weight yarn, it is quite squishy. So I'm excited to try this on and see what that feels like against my neck. And there are 2 ways that you can fold over the neckband. The first method is once you finish the ribbing, you can pick up 1 stitch at a time on the other side and knit that stitch together with the stitch on your needle. The other method is once you finish the ribbing, you knit a little bit past the ribbing, and then you go back and you sew the stitches together. And that's the method that I went with because it's very stretchy. Like, it's as stretchy as the fabric itself. And so that's usually the method that I prefer. I don't feel like it takes any longer or is any different in terms of effort. I think it's very comparable, but it just makes a really nice finish. And so far I'm sticking to the pattern with this, no mods yet. It is just a regular raglan, it's not a compound raglan, and you might think that after I went to all the effort to figure this compound raglan out that I might modify it. And I did consider that, and I started to do the math to modify it. But then I just decided I wanted an easy, mindless knit. So I'm sticking to the pattern, and I'm just using 1 strand of the worsted weight. This pattern calls for a DK and a lace weight held together, and the designer uses a silk mohair for the lace weight. But I wanted this sweater to just be a very comfy, everyday sweater for me, and I don't find mohair to be the comfiest. There are certain types that are nicer to wear, but they can get very expensive, and I don't know, I just wanted to keep it to a single worsted weight. But because of that, my gauge was a little bit off, so I did go up a needle size to get gauge in just the single strand of worsted. I knit a lot of this while we watched Dune Part 2, finally, and that's like an almost 3-hour movie, and it's just very like involved, and so this was the perfect project to work on while watching that movie. I think I'm almost done with the yoke, and then I'm going to try it on. I might block it at that stage, try it on, see how it's fitting, and then I think you immediately start the ribbing. So I am looking forward to getting to that stage. And this is going very fast compared to the figuring weight raglan that I just finished. And my next whip, you might remember that I showed this swatch. This is going to be a sweater for the boyfriend. And I finally got all the yarn, the rest of the yarn in. It was on special order, so it took about a month to get everything in. And here is the yarn that I'm going with. So it's the same colorful yarn, but it's a different black yarn. And this is my actual gauge swatch. And I am knitting a bulky version of the Traveler for him. So this is not on the needles currently because this is getting frogged. This is too big. So I took my gauge and I did all the math and I converted the pattern to a bulky weight. And to figure out the circumference for the sweater, we measured one of his hoodies and we got 46 inches around, and so we went with that number. But I had a feeling that in this bulky weight that amount of positive ease might be a little bit too much, and that was the case. He just tried it on a couple days ago and we confirmed that it's just a little bit too big, but this is a bulky weight yarn. This didn't take very long. I'm experimenting. It's not a big deal. But the color is exactly what he wanted, so it's perfect. So the yarn that I'm using is this colorful skein from Manos del Uruguay. This is their Alegria Grande in the colorway Hirache, and this is just perfect, especially paired with the black. This is just exactly what he wanted, and it took us a really long time to finally arrive at this stage, so it's very exciting. The black yarn that I'm using is Cascade 220, just in the black color, and I'm holding 2 strands of the black and 1 strand of the colorful yarn to get this fabric. So it is looking really good. I do think I'm going to run out of yarn though, which this yarn is very expensive, but that's okay. This is what we do for the ones we love. I looked at a couple different bulky weight sweaters to guesstimate my yardage, and then I added yardage for the hood, but I think I might still run out of yarn, so we'll see. I'm probably gonna wait to order until I get a little bit further into the body that I did just recast on this morning. So it's a little bit smaller. We're going for a 42-inch circumference this time. And I'm gonna get a little bit further into this before I decide if I need to buy more yarn. So I'm knitting the Traveler, the bulky version. I created a spreadsheet with all of the pattern instructions, but changed all the numbers to my gauge. And I think it's a little bit too much detail to talk about in this video, but if you're interested in learning more about that topic, definitely let me know in the comments. I think I might make a separate video, and it would be sort of a tutorial on how to actually, like, step by step, how to convert a pattern from one gauge to another gauge. Let me know. And we decided that the Traveler texture didn't look great in this bulky weight, so I'm just knitting it in stockinette. And I think with how colorful it is, that was the right decision, so it doesn't, like, the texture doesn't get lost in it. But I did include the side seams just to give it a little bit more structure. So I'm pretty much following the pattern, but just in stockinette and at a bulky weight. Okay, next, last episode I showed you some fiber that I was spinning for a new project, and I finished that skein. This braid is from Nest Fiber from a 2023 club colorway, and I'm using this as the color changing yarn in a Tessellated Vest, and I am combining it with this green. This is from Imperial Yarn. It is the Mackenzie line, and it's in the colorway Moss. I got this from a D-stash for a really good deal. And then I'm also including this honey colored mohair. This is from Knitting for Olive. It's their soft silk mohair in the colorway Dark Mustard. And the reason that I chose these colors is I saw somebody on Instagram who spun this exact fiber for a tessellated, and they had this moss green color for their main color, and they used like a dark brown mohair. So I changed that to more of a honey color, but I think these colors look so good together, and I'm very excited to cast on. I'm going to like make myself wait just a little bit until I get further into my other whips before I do, but I did swatch. So here's my first swatch. This is with 1 strand of mohair, which is what the pattern calls for. And although I do like this, I felt like the mohair was getting lost, and I really wanted that color to be more prominent. So I swatched a second time, and here is my second swatch. So this is with 2 strands of the mohair held together, and this is what I'm gonna go with. I really like the way the mohair comes across in this swatch. And at first I was a little hesitant to commit to the 2 strands of mohair, even though I really like this, because With this pattern, you are managing 3 different skeins of yarn and they're like getting tangled up on each other as you're knitting, and it's a little bit annoying. And I thought adding in an additional skein of mohair to that setup was going to be a nightmare. But I actually found that because the mohair is so sticky, the 2 strands stick together, and as long as I keep my mohair on one side and I keep my other yarns on the other side, it worked out okay. And I also found that holding the 2 strands of mohair was actually a little bit easier to knit, because with the single strand, the stitches would kind of get lost on my needles, and I found myself like knitting 2 strands together on accident. But with the 2 strands, my stitches are quite a bit more substantial and it's just easier to knit. So I think I'm gonna have a better time with the 2 strands. It does like change the cost of the project because I'm doubling the mohair, but I did already have 2 skeins for this project and that should be enough yardage. So I'm very excited. Both of these swatches show a lot of red for my color changing yarn, but as you saw, there are other colors in that skein. So I'm really excited to cast on and see what the other colors look like. And I should mention that my main color is a fingering weight. The pattern calls for a sport weight. So I went up a needle size for my swatch, and I'm just gonna do some math to figure out what size I should cast on with the gauge that I'm getting. It's not too different from the pattern gauge, so it won't be hard. I also finished another skein of Handspun. This is also fiber from Nest Fiber. This is a Rambouillet from the January Fiber Club. And I spun this as a 3-ply. This was my first time doing a traditional 3-ply. I've done a chain ply before, and I totally understand the hype. It is so squishy. It totally evened out my yarn. This is like probably the nicest skein that I've spun. And I think this colorway was perfect as a 3-ply. One of my friends said that it looks like candy, and Kensley, I think you're totally right, and now I want to eat it. So I spun this as a worsted weight. It is about 9 wraps per inch. This skein is 4 ounces exactly, and I got 193 yards out of it. And I'm pretty sure that this is going to be a single color worsted weight Harlow hat. Especially now that I finished my Musselburgh, I feel like I can totally cast on a new hat. So going to cast that on soon. I always want to knit with my Handspun as soon as I finish it. And while we're on the topic of spinning, I want to show my new hand-carded bat. This is a Melly Knits bat, and it is so gorgeous. It's literally a cloud. I actually filmed this entire episode yesterday and my mic malfunctioned, so I'm refilming it. And yesterday I unwrapped it on camera. So I'll put some of that footage here so you can see how small it's wrapped up, but then it just totally opens up into this huge bat. I'm so excited that I managed to get a Melly Knits bat, and I haven't fully decided how I'm going to spin it. I might just spin it as a bat. I might make rolags. I can't decide, and I want to be really precious with it. I was watching one of her lives, and she shows how each 100-gram bat is 2 sheets. So they're like 2 separate sheets right there. And this is what she calls a tuski, which is just a blend of a bunch of different fibers. So I'm not exactly sure what it is, but I just know that it's gorgeous. It's just so nice. And the main reason that I wanted this is because I want to learn long draw. I forgot to mention, but this skein I spun using continuous back draw, which I'm practicing, and I feel ready to try long draw. So I'm so excited for this. And on that same note, I have suddenly become incredibly invested in the idea of processing raw fleece. I have watched others do this for years, and I've always figured that at some point I would be bitten by the bug, but I just was never that interested in it. But it's like a flip is switched, and I am thinking about it all the time now. I am reading and watching everything about processing raw wool. I want to get my hands on a fleece so badly. I know a few people who keep sheep and they know some people, and I'm trying to get a fleece, any fleece that I can process and hand card. I'm actually obsessed about it now. So I wanted to share that in preparation for this new era in my life, I bought the Fleece and Fiber Source Book, which is a book that a lot of people recommend. I think I have recommended it, but it's the first time that I've actually read through it. And this is such a great reference book. For each breed that's included, it tells you the history of the breed and like any special characteristics. And then it also includes photos of what the raw wool looks like, what the clean wool looks like, and also what it looks like spun, knit, and woven. It's so cool. There's other information in here as well, and I've truly just been obsessed. Like, I am truly willing to risk it all. Like, I just want to throw out my tech career and put a couple sheep in my backyard. I'm ready to go shear a sheep. Like, last night I was literally looking up how to get certified to shear sheep. And honestly, everyone in my life who I've told about this, where I'm just like, I've suddenly become so invested in this, they're all about it. They're like, yeah, everything's going to shit. Like, go be a processor of raw wool. Go become a farmer. And I don't know that I would take it that far, but I also got the field guide to fleece so that when I'm out in the field and I'm meeting a bunch of sheep, I can quickly identify what breed they are. To be honest, this book doesn't contain any new or different information from this source book, but each page spread is a breed, so you can just quickly flip through and find what you're looking for, and it shows you the locks as well as the properties of the wool. So it's very useful when you're trying to learn about sheep breeds. So yeah, don't be surprised if I suddenly start exclusively talking about raw fleece. I think this is my new life now. But back to my normal life, I have been reading and watching things, so let's talk about that. In February, I finished the audiobook of Big Little Lies by Lianne Moriarty. To be honest, I was only listening to this because it was available at my library, so I needed an audiobook and it sounded interesting. I've only ever read one other Lianne Moriarty book. They're fine. Every now and then I am interested in white privileged women drama, and I think this time around I just wanted to listen to an Australian accent, to be quite honest. I did start the show, the HBO show, back in like 2019 when it came out, but I didn't finish it for some reason, so I just decided to read the book and find out what happens, and yeah, it was fine. I listened to it while cooking, cleaning, spinning, just doing my chores and going about my day. And it's an interesting like murder mystery, small town drama type of story. I'm currently reading an insane book called My Husband by Ventura. It is translated from French by Emma Ramadan, and this book is bonkers. It's about this woman who is obsessed with her husband, and it is a stream of consciousness style, so we're just getting all of her thoughts, like every single one of her thoughts about her husband, about her life with her husband, about her husband. This woman is truly a freak. Like, she is obsessed with her husband. And I'm talking about an actual obsession that is like unhealthy levels. And she becomes so fixated on these like random little things that have to do with her husband. Like, her and her husband went over to a friend's house and they played this game where you have to like assign each other a fruit. And her husband said that she was a clementine. And she completely spiraled over this and continues to bring it up throughout the novel, like many times. And I'm like, girl, what does that even mean? So she is just a total psycho. And if you think that this sounds really annoying to read, like, I definitely understand that. I kind of hate it, but I'm also just like eating it up. I just hit the 80% mark, and I think we're finally gonna get some plot for the first time in this book. and I think that the ending is pretty controversial, so I'm excited to get to that part. So I'm physically reading that book on my e-reader, but I also started a new audiobook because I usually like to have one going, and I started A Sorceress Comes to Call by Kingfisher. This is another one that was just available at my library, so I borrowed it, and I really like it so far. It is a retelling of the grim fairy tale Goose Girl, which I don't know anything about, so I am just along for the ride. But what I do know so far is that it is about a sorceress who has a daughter who she is very abusive towards and controls with her magic. And so we get the daughter's perspective as well as a couple other perspectives. I haven't read many fairy tale retellings, so I don't have much to compare it to, but this is an author that I've heard a lot about on BookTube, and I picked up this book, What Moves the Dead, last year. This is by the same author. This is a retelling of The Fall of the House of Usher, and I haven't read this one yet, but I really want to, so I just decided to listen to a book by the same author. I'm still watching Severance, of course. The group chats that I have about this show are insane. I cannot wait to find out how they finish this season. It has been a wild ride. And I'm also watching season 3 of The White Lotus along with pretty much everyone else. That is also wild, as to be expected from Mike White. I mentioned that we finally watched Dune Part 2, and I really liked it. I wanted to rewatch Part 1 before we watched it, but the timing just didn't work out. So I still want to rewatch it and compare the two. I think I liked Part 1 a little bit better, but I did have a good time with Part 2. I really like the movies. The books are also on my TBR. I'm definitely going to read those at some point. I loved Zendaya's character, Chani, and I was reading about how they changed her quite a bit from the books to the movies, and I think that decision was a good one. And the worm riding scenes, oh my god, they're so epic. Like, I want to go ride a worm. Except for the sand situation, like getting up everywhere, that didn't seem very comfortable. And the other movie that I watched this month was Train to Busan, which is a South Korean zombie apocalypse movie. This one's sort of a cult classic. It came out in 2016 and I had just never seen it, despite being a big horror movie fan and a relatively big zombie movie fan. I did have to split it up into 3 watch sessions just because I didn't have the time to watch the full thing in one sitting. And one of those sessions was like right before bed, and it totally hyped me up and I had some weird dreams. So it was quite suspenseful, even though it was a little bit predictable, but I enjoyed it quite a bit. And the ending, oh my god, I cried. Moving on to what I've been cooking and baking this month, the first thing I wanted to mention is a new recipe book that I got, The Bean Book. You might be familiar. I have borderline become obsessed with beans. Like, you know how the lady is obsessed with her husband? My husband is beans. This is a really popular book in the vegetarian cooking space. I am not fully vegetarian. I do eat some meat, and there are some recipes in here with meat. It's not fully vegetarian, but every recipe is based around beans. There are so many different types. It tells you all about them in this book. And there are a lot of really delicious looking recipes. You can see I have tagged quite a few that I would like to make. But to start out, I decided to make these refried beans. They're actually called glorious refried beans. This recipe is not that much different from any other recipe you find online. It's very simple, but this book also has a few different methods for cooking dried beans, and I tried out the slow cooker method. It's very easy, it just takes a lot of time, but obviously it is unattended time, so you can just pour everything in and then let it do its thing. And these beans are so good. Making your own refried beans from scratch, like, it's just so much better than the can. And I've been making everything with them. I've made burritos, tostadas, nachos. The other day I made a copycat crunch wrap and substituted the beans for the meat, and oh, so good. And while we're talking about beans, because listen, I could talk about beans all day, I have a couple other recipes for you. This month I made the lemony chickpea soup by Rainbow Plant Life. The soup is so flavorful. It also has rice in it, which I think was like the perfect addition to bulk it up. For the veggie broth, I used half chicken broth just because I have it, and half bean broth, which is the broth that came from the beans that I cooked. I think next time I would just add a little less nutritional yeast. We just both agreed that it didn't really need that full amount because there are so many other flavors going on and it is very umami forward. So that was a really good one. And another bean recipe that I made this month is from Sarah's Vegan Kitchen. I made the Marry Me butter beans recipe. If you've ever had like Marry Me chicken, it is just a like creamy tomato Tuscan sauce. And instead of the chicken, you put in butter beans, which are the same thing as lima beans, but they are picked when they're more mature. So it's been a while since I've eaten lima beans, but I think I remember them being a little bit earthy, maybe a little bit bitter, and butter beans are not at all. Well, they're a little bit earthy, but they're not bitter. This recipe is so simple and so tasty. It's definitely going to be part of our regular rotation. Instead of the sun-dried tomatoes, I just pulled some sun gold tomatoes that my boyfriend grew last summer and froze. So I just pulled some of those out, thawed them, and made the sauce with those instead. And this recipe was seriously so delicious and it didn't take long at all. I haven't really been baking much, but I did try a new recipe the other night, also from Sarah's Vegan Kitchen. I watched her video for the silken tofu chocolate mousse, and she says in the video that it doesn't taste like tofu, and I was a little bit skeptical, but I really wanted to try it. I eat a lot of tofu, but to be honest, I don't love the taste of just plain tofu. So I figured I was a pretty good person to test this out. And she's right, you really can't taste the tofu, especially if you let it fully chill. When it's room temperature, when you first make it, and I was like licking the spatula and stuff, like I could taste the tofu a bit, but it was still really good. Like there's enough chocolate in this recipe that it really does taste like chocolate mousse. And once you let it fully chill, like you really can't tell. The tofu just adds a really nice fluffy texture. So that's what's up with me this past month. Thanks for hanging out with me. If you were working on a project while you were watching, definitely let me know what you were working on down below, and I hope to see you next time. Bye!